Hello! Today's lesson is called In the Museum. We're going to look at some transport vocabulary. We're going to talk about the past simple tense. So was and wasn't, were and weren't. We're also going to look at some phonics and some reading and writing. So first, let's look at some vocabulary. Number 1, ferry. Ferry. A ferry is a very large passenger boat. A ferry. Bus. Bus. Helicopter. Helicopter. Motorbike. Motorbike. Plane. Plane. Taxi. Taxi. Train. Train. And the last one is tram. Okay, maybe you haven't seen a tram before. It runs in a town or a city on an electric cable. A tram. Okay, so one more time. Ferry, bus, helicopter, motorbike, plane, taxi, train, tram. So lots of transport vocabulary there. Now let's look at some grammar. And today we're going to look at the simple past tense. So we take regular verbs and we usually add ed to the end. So regular verb, base verb, ed. For example, walked, showed, watched, played, smiled, stopped. Okay, so you can see the verb is in its base form and we just add an ed. Sometimes we double the consonant, like stopped. There's 2 P's there. And of course there are many irregular verbs which you can discover, but we're not going to look at today. So the simple rule for simple past, base verb plus ed. Okay, so today we're going to look especially at was and were. So let's look at this table. We've got the subject here. I was in the negative form. I wasn't. You were. You weren't. He, she, it was. He was, she was, it was. Or wasn't for the negative. He wasn't. You were. You weren't. We were. We weren't. They were. They weren't. Okay, so we use was and wasn't, or were and weren't, when we're talking about things in the past, using the past simple. Okay? We use, let's look at some examples. So, there was a park in our town 50 years ago. There wasn't a shopping mall in our town 50 years ago. There were some funny trains 100 years ago. There weren't any planes 200 years ago. Okay, so for singular we use was or wasn't. For plural, if we're talking about more than one of something, we use were or weren't. So, a park, just one. There was a park. A shopping mall, just one. There wasn't a shopping mall. Some funny trains, so more than one funny train. There were some funny trains. And planes, there weren't any planes 200 years ago. Okay, so you can see we're talking about our town and the past. So we can use time words when we talk about the past. For example, yesterday, last week, or last year. Monday, we can specify the day, Monday. Ago, so we would put the amount of time before that, such as 50 years ago. And then, back then. Okay? We use lots of or some with there were. Because it's positive, we use lots of or some. There were. For there weren't, the negative, we use any. So there weren't any. Okay, so positive, there were. Lots of, some. There were some funny trains. There were lots of planes. So, and for there weren't, the negative, any. There weren't any planes. Okay? So, singular, I was. You were. Although it's a singular pronoun, we use were for you. He was, she was, it was. So for singular, was. Except for you. With you, we use were. You were. Plural, we were, you were, they were. All were. So, easier to think for singular was, for plural were, and just remember the exception. For singular you, we still use were. Okay, so let's choose was or were and fill in the gaps on the slide. So number 1, was or were. There, a park in our town 100 years ago. Okay, so a park, just one, singular, so it's was. There was a park in our town 100 years ago. Number 2. There was or were trains 100 years ago. Trains. There's an S on the end, so it's plural. So we use were. There were trains 100 years ago. Number 3. There were motorbikes 90 years ago. Same again, motorbikes, plural. So it's were. There were motorbikes 90 years ago. There were planes 50 years ago. Planes, again, is plural. There were planes 50 years ago. There were a hotel in the town 10 years ago. A hotel, so one hotel, we use was. There was a hotel in the town 10 years ago. Last one. There